Hey, so we're getting ready to do the circulatory recipe for the posterior leg. Before we begin, we should just make mention real quick. We're going to be talking about 5 different tools: palm, knuckle, trench thumb, and iron. Palm is just using an open hand. It's very similar to an effleurage where we make full contact with the palm through the fingers. Knuckle is going to be using our fist. We can either use it by doing a stroke through the fist this way, or we can turn the fist and also do a knuckling stroke forward this way. So we can stroke this or this way when we're using a knuckle. Palm knuckle trench. Our trench is going to be pointed fingers. A lot of times I try to stack the middle finger on top of the pointer and the ring finger to kind of make this like almost pyramid type stack. When we're using a trench, you don't have to use a lot of pressure. You just want to use the pointiness of this. So I often say when you're using a trench, keep your palm lifted and keep your fingers pointed, and you don't have to do a heavy amount of pressure on this one. You just want to make sure it's nice and narrow. Palm knuckle trench thumb. When we do our thumbs, just remember that thumbs that swim are thumbs that are going to hurt and wear themselves out a lot more. So instead of making your thumbs swim like this, you want to try to turn your wrist to allow the thumb to be straight. And instead of the thumb having to do a lot of work, now our body can do the work for us by using the rest of our mechanics. And lastly, we're going to use our ulna or our iron. When we use the ulna, remember that you never ever use the back side of your elbow. You only use the front of the ulna all the way down to the olecranon process right here. Also remember that when you're using your ulna, you want to make sure that you're not leaning over your elbow, but rather you're sitting behind your elbow. It's really important in terms of maintaining appropriate posture for your shoulder. So, having said that, we'll go ahead and begin. When we start this recipe, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to be doing some compressions going down the thigh. So a lot of times what we'll do is I'll come in and we'll palpate, we'll look for the ischial tuberosity, and I'll bring in a fist and just do some nice easy compressions. They don't have to be very heavy pressure. We're just kind of warming up the leg, saying hello before we do our first undrape. As I do almost all of my movements in this recipe, I'm going to almost always be in a bow stance, but if I ever use a horse stance, I'll let you know. Once we've done our opening compressions, we'll go ahead and take the drape back. Great, and so we've now undraped the first leg. Now I usually start with a more conservative drape that covers the glutes. If we're going to work on the glutes, then we'll also undrape the glutes, so that's when I can take the sheet back and expose the area that we're going to be working on. So now, what we are going to do is going to go ahead and take our lotion or oil, and we're going to do a broad effleurage to spread our lubricant over the body. In this particular case, I usually do mostly the thigh and the glutes first because I'm using lotion, and lotion dries a little faster. If you have oil though, you can bring it all the way down to the calf, no worries. Okay, now that we've effleuraged on our lubricant, I'm going to do a deep effleurage going up the hamstrings and over the glutes. This is going to be a palming stroke. It's a heavier, slower effleurage than we're going to be using for most of the other strokes. I'm still in a bow stance. And notice how my whole body is shifting forward to carry my stroke. I'm not letting my arm run off by itself like that. So my whole body moves through this stroke. Okay, so when we're done with that, we'll go ahead and move up to our first kind of focus area, which is going to be on the glutes. So when we're working on the glutes, this is the first time that we're going to do our set of 5 different tools. So we're going to palm, knuckle, trench, thumb, and iron. With our palm, in this particular case, I'm going to fold my fingers down so that way they don't poke under the drape, and I'm just going to go ahead and palm from the greater trochanter towards the sacrum. Using my bow stance, you can see I'm kind of shifting my weight back and forward and varying where I'm stroking so that way I can cover all of the glutes. This is one of the best things about circulatory massage, is it can cover all the square inches of the surface of the skin. So we want to make sure that everything gets a little bit of attention. Okay, with our palm done, we can do this half circle, kind of bring it to a closure. Then I'm going to do knuckles. So again, knuckles can be either vertical, like I am doing now, this way, or they could be horizontal, depending on what's more comfortable for you. Good, going around. We'll go ahead and do our trench next. Pointed fingers, lifted palm. It doesn't have to be heavy pressure. Okay, doing strokes through the gluteals. Kind of getting the medius over here, all the way through to the maximus. Okay, then we'll come through and we'll get into some thumbing. As I use my thumbs, you'll notice that I'm turning my shoulders left and right, so that way my thumbs don't have to swim, my body's helping to drive them. And don't be afraid to shift your stance around. You'll notice that I pick my feet up and I move around as I dress different parts of the glutes. Always in a bow stance though. Okay, and then lastly we're going to do an iron. It's a big tool, so it's not going to be a lot of stroke. It's just a little short stroke here. And we'll finish off by doing kind of a nice deep half circle to finish that off. Okay? Once we're done with the glutes, a lot of times when you're not working directly on the glutes, you can go ahead and re-drape them. All right, so we're going to be moving on next to the hamstrings. As we go over the hamstrings, we want to make sure that each of our strokes always ends at the ischial tuberosity. If you stop before then, even people who don't know the anatomy are going to feel like you didn't quite finish the stroke. So when we go through the hamstrings with each of our 5 strokes, you want to make sure that you don't stop until you get all the way up to the ischial tuberosity, and then you can come back down to begin the next one. So we'll start by doing our palm stroke. I'm doing a bow stance, looking mostly up the table, just lightly across. Remember, your front foot is always pointed in the same direction as your push. You'll notice my elbow is not bending because I'm not pumping through my arm, I'm moving through my stance. As we palm stroke, we want to make sure that not only are we getting the hamstrings, but we're not just getting the same strokes. You're going to see that some of my strokes are going to come a little bit more medial, and a couple of my strokes are going to be a little bit more lateral. Now, one other thing you probably noticed is I switched hands depending on which part of the body I'm getting. The more medial side can be gotten by my inside arm, the one that's closer to the table, and the more outside or lateral strokes can be gotten by my outside arm, or the one that's farther away from the table. So once we've done our palm strokes, we're going to switch to our knuckles. And again, kind of fanning out, making sure that you're covering all of the back of the leg, just not one stroke over and over again. Then we'll switch into our trench. Again, pointed fingers, raised palm. It's a sharp tool, but it doesn't need to be very heavy. It's very good at tracing the shapes of muscles and the borders between them. As we do these strokes, I also want to encourage you, keep your pace up. Try not to go so slow as you might do in your regular circulatory class. We don't always have to go fast, but you should be able to go faster without feeling uncomfortable. Once we've done our trench, we're going to go into our thumbs. Again, notice I'm using not only my stance to move forward, but I'm turning my hips and shoulders to help facilitate each of my thumbs moving through the body. And lastly, we'll bring in our iron, using that ulna, broad strokes all the way up to the ischial tuberosity. Using a little, catching a little of the inside, I can switch arms, catching a little of the lateral hamstrings. And that'll finish the hamstrings. Now we're going to work on the IT band and the TFL. We're going to stand in the same spot, but instead of using our inside arm, we're going to use our outside arm to palm the IT band and the TFL very easily this way. There we go. All right. So we're going to palm, and then we'll knuckle. And then we'll trench. And again, I try to not just get the same line over and over, just a little difference each time, make them really feel like everything got a touch. Okay, once we do that, we're going to transition down into the lower leg using a palm knee. And so we're basically going to use our palms and our folded fingers to kind of press and push forward as we sink backwards, getting closer and closer to the distal leg. And we can do that a couple times, pushing and kneading towards ischial tuberosity, but sinking back towards the knee. And this will bring us into the distal leg. Great, so we just did our IT band into the TFL from the side of the table using our outside arm. Once we've done palm, knuckle, and trench, what we're going to do is we're going to bend the knee and we're going to fold the leg into figure 4, turning the leg open. Now as you do this, you need to make sure that you're holding the drape so that way the inside of the drape doesn't get too loose. It holds tight and it doesn't show anything. Once we have the leg opened up, the IT band now is facing upwards. We're going to go ahead and do our palm. Back into our knuckles. I know I didn't mention it, but we're still in a bow stance here. My front foot always facing the same direction as my push. Notice my elbow's not bending. We're doing our trench right now. And then we'll switch to our thumb. Sometimes as I'm working up with my thumbs, if I feel like my fingers are creeping towards the drape, I'll fold them in. So that way my fingers don't feel like they might go under the drape. And then lastly, we're going to iron. Great. We can place the leg back on the table straight, and then we'll do our palm knead, pressing from the palm into the knuckles, pushing towards the ischial tuberosity, but stretching back towards the knee or moving back towards the knee. And we'll be ready for the distal leg next.
And action.
Okay, so we just got done doing our palm knead as we were moving back down towards the calf. As I stand in bow stance here and I was doing my palm knead, I'm often going to step backwards, and now that I'm here at the calf, I'm going to be standing in the right spot. We're going to be still standing in a bow stance, facing forward, front foot in the same direction as our push, and we're going to do our palm, knuckle, trench, thumb, and iron over the calf, thinking mostly of gastrocnemius. Okay, so palm stroke, relaxed hand, relaxed wrist, trying to think about getting all the surfaces, not just the one that's facing directly towards me. Then we'll switch to our knuckles. Good. When we switch to our trench, we're going to point the fingers and lift the palm. Remember, this is meant to be a pointy tool. It doesn't have to be a heavy one, though. I often think about tracing the edges of a muscle when I use this tool, or tracing between one muscle and another. Okay, coming to our thumbs now. As per usual, our stance pushes us forward. We do a light turn at the hips and the shoulders to help the thumbs do less work. Good. Finally into our iron. Again, I often use my outside arm to catch the lateral part of the leg and my inside arm to catch the medial part of the leg. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to take the leg, we're going to take our bow stance and face it directly across the table. We'll push the leg laterally, and now our fibula is facing up towards the ceiling. We're going to palm knead the fibularis muscles. Remember, like I mentioned before, if you're not right on top of the fibula, you're probably missing this muscle. So you should feel like underneath your pressure, you feel the ridge of the fibula. And we're going to do that all the way down to the ankle. Good. Then we'll turn the leg back to a neutral posture. We're going to use kind of grasping, pinching hands. We're going to grasp and pinch and squeeze and lift. It's almost like we're going to pick the calf up, but then it slips through our fingers instead. And we're going to use our stance in a in a horse stance, to lift through our stance instead of trying to lift through our shoulders. So again, notice my elbows aren't bending. I'm not trying to hike up my shoulders here. Everything's happening in my legs except for a light squeeze in my fingers. Great, and then this will make us ready for our next set of moves where we'll be sitting on the table.
Very good, very good.
Shot E, take one.
Action.
All right, so we're ready to go ahead and sit on the table. This is a nice part because for us, if we're on our feet all day, this does give us kind of a chance to have a seat, get off our feet for a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take the client's leg, bend the knee into a flexion. When we sit down on the table, you want to always make sure that at least one of your feet is solidly on the ground. Once we have them here, we can go ahead and let their foot rest against our shoulder or chest. And then what we're going to do is a series of 4 moves here on the calf, beginning with an effleurage. Now when I effleurage the calf, I really try to make sure that my wrist is still straight with my push. I try not to effleurage as much like this because the push is going across the wrist. It can create a little bit more pressure sometimes. So pushing through my effleurage here. Okay, my next move is going to be a trenching movement. It's kind of like a monkey grasp where we put our fingers together in kind of a hook. And we can take that hook and we can kind of drag it through the calf. A lot of times we'll start in the middle, but remember that you can turn and get slightly different surfaces with this grasping move as well. Okay, once we've done that, we're going to do some squeezing palm circles. Sometimes, depending on the size of your hands versus the size of the client, you might not be able to interlock your fingers, but even if you don't interlock your fingers, you can still do this movement. And oftentimes I say you can do this movement from the knee to the ankle, or even from the ankle down to the knee. You can go both directions. And our last movement on this seated folded knee is going to be a cross pull, where we pull one way and then the other. And we can kind of almost treat this like a stretch, take it slow, make it feel nice and deep. And the alternative of this is called a ring, and that's when we do both of them at the same time. Once we've done all these movements, we can go ahead and come back up off the table and set the client's leg back down.
Perfect.
I was totally looking off camera for the end of that one, but whatever.
They've seen.
Take one.
Shot F, take one. Give me 1 second.
And action. Oh wait, shit, sorry. 1 second. One more second. One adjustment, and then one more adjustment. Okay, one more again. Okay, perfect. Action.
All right, so now that our client's leg is back on the table, we're going to come down to the foot and we're going to wring the foot. I often say this is, you're going to imagine like you're wringing the foot like it's kind of like a wet dish towel. We're just going to grasp strongly and create a light twist. A lot of times I use my thumbs to create a little pressure on the plantar surface of the foot. I occasionally will come over and grasp the ankle and kind of give it a little pull and push as part of this twist. And then otherwise just kind of squeezing, giving the whole foot a little bit of tension here. Okay. Once we've done that, our next move is going to be a traction and a rotation of the hip. Now in order to do this, what we're going to be doing is we're going to do a grasp of the ankle. Try not to pull on the foot. If we pull the foot in a traction, some people will feel a discomfort in their ankle. Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll look for the ankle bones and I'll grab at or above the ankle bones. One hand under, one hand over. Now if the leg is particularly slippery because of the oil, what you can do is you can take your sheet and wrap it around the ankle to help you get a little bit better of a grasp. Again, one hand under, one hand over. When I pull, I don't want to pull through my shoulders. I want to keep my shoulders back and relaxed, and I want to shift my stance like I'm sitting into a seat. Now that I have a traction on the leg, I'm going to use my whole body to create a light circular rotation in the hip. So you can kind of see I'm standing up and squatting down to lift the leg up, and I'm lightly rotating to create the circular movement. Once we've done that, you can release the traction. That's going to be all the moves for the first leg. Now we're going to do all the moves for the second leg. So now what we can do is we can re-drape this leg and move to the second side.
Was I in the re-draping part?
That's okay. It doesn't need to happen.
That's not as important.
Yeah, it's not really as important.
Okay. Shot you, take one.
Shot G, take one. Stay over here, and action.
So now that you've done moves, or rather now that you've done all the circulatory moves on both of the legs, we're going to show the last move of this session. So this is called ChaCha, and it basically is kind of, it's a high energy move. It's kind of useful because it can kind of bring a little bit more awareness and awakeness to the client before this particular part of the massage ends. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to take our palms and we're going to make little circles over the glutes, starting from the PSIS and then going lateral into the hips. If it's tough for you to do circles with the hands, you can just do up and down with them instead. I'm going to stand in a bow stance looking down the table. I'm going to take my hands palms down. I'm going to place them over the glutes around the PSIS. And I'm going to start by more vigorously shaking the glutes. And as I go through, I can start to slow down and make my circles of pressure a little deeper until I bring it all the way out into the hips. And once you're done with that, you can do any other closing moves that you feel are appropriate, and this session will be finished. So this was the circulatory routine for the posterior legs. All right.